My boots hit the wet concrete, and the echo came back wrong, too fast, too sharp, like the walls were closer than they should be. The air was heavy with cold and metal, the kind that settles on your tongue and makes you wonder if you're breathing or swallowing. Somewhere ahead, in the dark, a low hum crawled through the corridor. It wasn't loud, but it pushed against my chest like an invisible hand. My flashlight cut a narrow path over peeling paint, rusted pipes, and a trail of water that wasn't melting from anywhere. Every step felt borrowed. The guard at the surface had locked the hatch behind me. No one said when it would open again. Before I regret saying any of this, hit that like button. Subscribe if this is already making you uncomfortable. And tell me what city you're watching from. And what time it is. East Berlin, January 1978. The hum wasn't constant. It swelled and dipped, almost like it was breathing. I slowed my pace, not because I wanted to, but because the ground under me started to feel softer, as if the concrete itself had thinned out. The beam from my flashlight caught specks of dust in the air, but the dust wasn't falling. It floated in place, trembling with each pulse of that sound. The tunnel walls were lined with thick, gray conduit, some patched with new tape, some fraying like they hadn't been touched in years. I ran my hand over one of them, and it vibrated, faintly under my palm. Whatever was making that noise was wired into everything. Halfway down, I passed a door with no handle, just a flat metal panel, flush with the wall. No markings, no lock, no visible hinges. I tapped it with the butt of my flashlight. The echo it gave back was short, muffled. Behind it, there was space-occupied space. I kept moving, counting my steps out of habit. 84 paces later, the corridor opened into a wider chamber. Low ceiling, thick with moisture, and no visible source of light except what I brought with me. My beam caught something in the far corner movement. A shape, but when I turned toward it, all I saw was a section of wall slick with condensation. Hum was stronger here. It seemed to come from below the floor, pressing upward, pushing the air against my ribs. I crouched and pressed my ear to the damp surface. It wasn't just sound, it was a vibration that seemed to bypass my hearing entirely and go straight to the bones. Something dripped from overhead. I tilted the light up and found a series of thin pipes crisscrossing the ceiling, each with small beads of water forming and dropping at uneven intervals. I followed one of them along the wall until it disappeared into a seam. I hadn't noticed before a vertical line where two slabs met imperfectly. I set my hand against that seam. The vibration was stronger here. It reminded me of the feeling you get when a train is approaching underground, except there was no track, no platform, and no schedule. Behind me, a metallic click echoed down the corridor I'd just walked. Not loud, but deliberate. I spun around, light slicing the darkness. Nothing. Just the slow drip of water and the low, steady hum. My instincts told me to mark the seam for later, but I didn't have chalk or tape, just a folded paper in my coat pocket with the entry time and a single line of instruction. Remain on designated path. I moved on, letting the hum guide me deeper. The floor sloped down without warning, forcing me to adjust my footing. The air got warmer here, as if I'd crossed an invisible boundary. It made the cold sweat down my back feel sharper. At the end of the slope, the corridor split into two. Left was narrower, with a heavier shadow. Right was slightly wider, but the hum seemed fainter in that direction. My training told me to follow the stronger signal. My gut told me the same. I chose left. Within 3 steps, the walls narrowed enough that my shoulders brushed both sides. The concrete was warm to the touch now. The hum had changed less like breathing, more like a sustained note. Then it stopped. The sudden silence was so complete, it made my ears ring. I froze, not because I was afraid, but because something in me recognized the quiet as intentional. Like the pause before someone answers the phone, a single droplet fell onto the back of my neck, warm, not cold. I turned my light upward. The pipes were gone. In their place, a dark, seamless ceiling. And that's when the hum returned louder, closer, and this time, coming from directly behind me. The hum hit my spine first, then my teeth. I turned, slow, keeping the beam low. The corridor behind me looked the same. Damp wall, seen to the right, slope fading into dark. No footsteps. No breathing, that wasn't mine. I stepped back until the pressure eased. You don't fight what you don't understand. You measure it and live to write it down. The assignment was handed to me in a hallway that smelled like toner and boiled coffee. No briefing room, no map. A key, a schedule window, and the instruction to stay off the radio unless I was bleeding. It started out like any other operation, until it didn't. I accepted the silence because I'd accepted worse. Back then, the badge just meant you'd lie better than the next guy. Ahead, the left passage tightened. I moved with the light pressed to my chest to cut glare. The hum rose by degrees, not louder, heavier. The seam I'd noted reappeared on this side, a continuation, as if the corridor had been poured around something older. If this was a test, I wasn't the only subject. A reflection winked at ankle height. I knelt. A square floor plate with two recessed bolts and a hairline gap. The vibration was strongest there. I set my palm on it and counted to 10. The answer came as pulses. 9, pause, 3 in quick succession, not random. Someone had taught it to speak. I tried the plate with my heel. No give. The corridor ended at a rectangular opening framed by raw concrete and a loose cable that should have been tied back. Maintenance here had been rushed or interrupted. I logged the detail and tested the threshold with my foot before stepping through. The chamber beyond was taller. My beam took a second to find depth. A catwalk crossed left to right, metal grate, slick with condensation. No rail on the near side. I stepped on and felt it shiver, not from my weight, but from the hum traveling the supports. Below, the void. Swallowed light after a few meters. Pipes ran vertically, each with a valve tagged in stenciled numbers that matched no system I knew. You ever smell fresh paint and think, someone's hiding something? I did. A sharp note cut through the wet air. It didn't match the rust. On the far wall, a patch of gray covered older markings. I angled the light and caught a ghost Alex before the overcoat won. I clicked on my pocket recorder. 2 minutes. Of ambient, nothing spoken. Proof of the hum in case the paperwork ate the rest. We were trained for everything except for that. The little window fogged from my breath. A metal thunk sounded below, followed by a brief drop in vibration, like a system switching modes. The catwalk trembled. I crouched and watched the valves. One turned a quarter by itself, slow, then returned. No cable moved. No hand. I filed it under remote, then under classified, then under don't die here. At the far end, a service box hung open with no screws. Inside, a relay board with American serial stickers half torn away. I knew the manufacturer. We'd borrowed their parts under other names. East Berlin Bones, West Hardware. I took a photo with the pocket camera 2 clicks, a whine. Evidence survives in pockets, not in meetings. The hum shifted higher, near the edge of hearing. My balance went strange, like standing on a ferry. I swallowed. My ears popped. The recorder needle pegged. I switched it off. A red indicator woke under the catwalk, deep in the dark. Not a bulb, a slit of light from a panel. It pulsed with the hum. 9, pause, 3. Same count as the plate. The place wasn't just operating. It was listening. And if it was listening, Someone expected an answer. I didn't answer. I backed to the opening, heel to grate, careful not to slip. That should have been the end of it. But then the elevator cage behind the wall coughed, and the cable began to move. The sound deepened, a low roll like machinery waking. Dust lifted from the grate in puffs. I steadied the light and waited. The first thing I saw was the cage-thick mesh, paint flaking in pale curls. It shuddered as it descended, metal scraping metal, like an animal resisting the leash. I stepped back against the wall, flashlight low, pulse matching the groan of the pulleys. No buttons, no call panel, just the gate that rattled with each. Floor it passed. When it landed, the cage door slid open halfway and stopped. Inside, shadows lay across the floor in stripes from the mesh. I stepped in, the air warmer, tinged with oil and something sharper ozone. The hum returned, muted here but constant, a bass note in my bones. The gate slammed shut on its own. The motor kicked in without a sound from me. We dropped. The numbers on the wall hand painted, uneven, started at -1 and went down. -5, -9. I stopped counting at -12. The light overhead flickered in long intervals, just enough to show the rust creeping in arcs around the bolts. I thought of the guard at the hatch, the way he looked past me like I was already gone. The ride didn't slow. It ended the way a fall does. Suddenly, the gate slid open into a narrow hall. The walls here were smooth, no seams, no pipes, just concrete so clean it reflected the flashlight beam in a dull haze. The air pressed in, heavy. The hum was stronger again, leaking through the floor. Halfway down, I passed a small table with a telephone rotary dial, no cord. Beside it, a clipboard with pages curled at the edges. I flipped one over. The sheet was blank, except for a grid of numbers, handwritten in 2 columns. The left column matched the 9-3 pulse. The right, blank, like it was waiting for someone to fill it in. The hall ended at a steel door. Industrial, thick, a wheel lock at chest height, no markings. I set the flashlight between my teeth and spun the wheel. The mechanism gave reluctantly, metal squealing against metal. The door swung inward to reveal a wide landing and a stairwell going further down. Each step grated, damped out the hum, became a pulse you could almost mistake for your own heartbeat if you wanted to. I didn't want to. I descended, counting each step. Out of habit. At the 3rd landing, the smell changed iron, but not from rust. It had a warmth to it, metallic and faintly sweet. I'd smelled it before, just never underground. The stairs ended at a service tunnel, lit by a single bare bulb hanging on a crooked wire. The bulb swayed slightly, though no air moved. Directly ahead, a freight door sat half open. Through the gap came a glow that pulsed in time with the hum. I approached, crouched, and peered through. The room beyond was large, almost circular, with walls broken by narrow alcoves. At the center, out of focus in the low light, was something cylindrical. I couldn't see its top or bottom from here, just the curved flank and a dark seam spiraling down its surface. Somewhere inside, machinery whined at a pitch that made my molars ache. Behind me, the elevator gate slammed shut. The motor hummed again, but this time, the sound didn't come from the shaft. It came from the room. From the cylinder, the glow intensified. The pulse quickened, and the freight door began to roll open without anyone touching it. The freight door rolled back just far enough to let me slip inside. The glow washed over everything, turning the concrete floor into a dull silver. The hum was now a constant pressure behind my eyes. The first body was on my left, slumped against the wall beneath one of the alcoves. A guard's uniform, East German cut, boots laced tight, cap still on. His eyes were open, fixed on nothing. No blood, no bruises, no sign he'd even fallen. It looked like he'd simply decided to stop existing mid-shift. I scanned the room. The second lay near the cylinder, sprawled on his back, one hand still resting on the butt of his holstered pistol. I checked loaded, safety on. His expression was calm. Too calm. I'd seen dead faces before. They usually had some story left in them. These didn't. The third was at the far end, half in shadow. I approached, careful to keep the cylinder in my periphery. This one was younger, maybe mid-20s, jaw slack, breathing mask hanging useless around his neck. His skin was pale, but unmarked. I knelt and touched the side of his neck. Cold. 3 men, 3 positions, no wounds, no sign of struggle. They weren't killed by bullets, blades, or gas. That left a smaller, stranger list one that didn't make sense outside of classified files. The hum climbed slightly in pitch, enough to draw my attention back to the cylinder. Its surface seemed to ripple faintly, though it could have been the light. I moved closer. The air grew warmer the nearer I got, but the warmth felt wrong, like it wasn't coming from heat at all. Beside the second guard, I noticed a clipboard, this one clipped with multiple sheets. The top page was lined with dates and times, each, followed by 3 sets of numbers. The last entry was today's date, stamped neatly. The numbers in the third set matched the pulse pattern 9. Pause. 3 that I'd felt earlier. I slipped the sheet free and folded it into my coat. A faint hiss broke the rhythm of the hum. I turned toward the source. A thin vent, high. On the wall, exhaled a barely visible mist. It didn't reach the floor, it evaporated halfway down. Instinct told me not to breathe it. The third guard's mask lay near my foot. I picked it up, checked the straps, and pulled it on. The hiss stopped. The hum deepened again. From my position, I could see faint outlines on the floor, darker than the surrounding concrete rectangles where something had once been bolted down and removed. Whatever this machine was, it hadn't always been here. Glow dimmed for a heartbeat, then flared again. That was when I noticed it. The bodies weren't perfectly still, not breathing, not twitching, but there was the faintest, almost imperceptible shiver in their fingers, timed exactly with the hum. I stepped back, my boot scraping against the floor. The sound echoed too long, like it had been swallowed, and replayed. Then, as if on cue, the freight door began to close behind me. No motor noise, no visible mechanism moving it, just a heavy slide of steel against steel. I was inside now, sealed in with the machine and its 3 silent witnesses. And for the first time since I'd descended, I felt the vibration in my teeth turn into a low, deliberate pulse. As if it had noticed me. Up close, the cylinder was taller than 2 men and wider than a freight car. No panels, no switches, no access points, just seamless metal that drank in the light instead of reflecting it. The spiral seam I'd glimpsed earlier ran all the way around, like a single thread holding the thing shut. The hum had a texture now, a layered vibration that made my vision pulse in sync. I reached out, not to touch it, just to test the air, and felt resistance, faint but undeniable, like pushing against water. My hand stopped inches away. A faint tick echoed from within. Not mechanical, not clock-like, more organic, as if something inside was adjusting itself to me. I backed away, circling slowly, keeping the glow in view. On the far side, half hidden behind a support beam, sat a battered wooden crate stamped with an American export code. The stenciled letters had been painted over in gray, but the wood smelled faintly of salt and oil shipping container stock, not local manufacture. I crouched and pried the lid loose with my flashlight. Inside, coils of heavy cable, neatly tied, and a small metal box the size of a radio receiver. It had 1 dial and a strip of tape with numbers, frequencies, handwritten in black ink. Several matched known shortwave bands. Others were wrong. The hum surged as I lifted the box. It wasn't my imagination. The pitch changed, climbing just above comfort. Behind me, the second guard's holster creaked. I turned. He hadn't moved. Not in any way a living man could. But his eyes, they weren't looking at the ceiling anymore. I set the box down slowly. The pitch eased back to its steady low. Pulse. My breath sounded loud inside the masked dot in the corner. A maintenance cart leaned against a wall, draped in a stained tarp. I pulled it back. Underneath, a single heavy wrench, a clipboard with schematics, and a Polaroid photograph. The picture was of this room, the same machine, but the bodies were different 3 others, in the exact same positions. I slid the photo into my coat pocket, the edges damp against the lining dot. The spiral seam on the cylinder shifted, just slightly. A hiss escaped, and for a moment, I thought the glow inside would spill out. Instead, it pulsed once, hard enough to make the floor under me shudder. Somewhere high above, metal groaned a sound carried through pipes, reverberating down into the room. I glanced toward the freight door. Still shut dot, then I saw it. Faint. Marks in the dust near the third guard's boot. Not footprints, drag marks. As if he'd been moved here, placed. I looked at the others. Same dot, this wasn't where they'd fallen. This was where they'd been arranged. The hum cut out completely. The sudden void was worse than the sound. In that silence, I could hear my own pulse hammering in my ears. And then something else. A slow, deliberate knock from inside the cylinder. 3 beats. A pause. 9 beats. The same pattern I'd felt in the floor plate. I should have left. Right then. But the wheel lock on the freight door spun on its own. And the opening beyond was darker than when I'd arrived. The freight door's gap was a slit of black. The glow from the cylinder barely bleeding past me. I stepped toward it, careful not to break the pattern of the hum with my own footsteps. 9. Pause. 3. The moment I crossed the threshold, the air changed. Warmer, thicker dot above, the ceiling webbed into a maze of steel pipes and insulated conduits. Steam hissed from a joint somewhere in the darkness, curling into threads that drifted across my beam. I tilted the flashlight upward and froze. Shapes moved. Not fast, more like shadows taking their time, slipping between the pipework. Limbs? Tools? It was hard to tell. The steam made them vanish and reappear at odd angles. I clicked off the light and listened. The hum was muted here, but the metallic creak of shifting weight overhead was clear. Someone or something was up there. I waited for the sound to repeat, counting the seconds. At 8, it came again. Closer this time. I took a step back toward the freight door, only to find it sealed tight. No latch movement, no motor whine, just shut. I pressed my hand to the metal. Warm the steam thickened, clouding the upper levels entirely. I switched the light back on, sweeping the ceiling. Empty. Just the slow drift of vapor. I moved along the wall, passing a narrow service ladder bolted into place. The rungs were slick, dark stains marking where hands had gripped recently. I tested one solid enough, but I didn't climb. Not yet. A faint thud sounded above, directly over the cylinder's position in the adjacent room. Then a burst of steam vented violently, hissing down and obscuring everything for a moment. When it cleared, the shapes were gone. I aimed the beam at the far corner and found a hatch, small, square, with a simple turn latch. I flipped it open. Inside, just a dark chute going straight up into the pipe network. The warm air flowed from there, carrying a faint smell I recognized too well. Burned electronics. From somewhere in the maze came a new sound. Not the hum, not the hiss. A slow, wet tapping, irregular. I followed it along the wall to another. Vent, this one chest height. I leaned in and caught a glimpse through the grating. A pair of eyes stared back, unblinking, unfocused, framed in shadows and steam. Before I could react, the face moved back into the darkness, and the tapping stopped. I stayed there, watching the vent, for what felt like minutes. Nothing, just the low exhale of air dot the ladder. Loomed to my left. If there were answers, they were up there. I started to climb, one rung at a time, until my head cleared the first tier of pipes. My beam skimmed across metal and condensation, no shapes, no eyes, but the hum surged again, rushing through the steel like blood, through veins dot, and from somewhere deeper in the network. I heard the same knock pattern 3, pause, 9 echoing back, as if the machine itself was speaking to the shadows dot. By the time I made it back to the surface, the cold air outside felt unreal, too clean, too still. The guard who'd locked me in wasn't there. Just the hatch, open, and a clipboard resting on the step. My name wasn't on it dot at the temporary command post. A folding table under a sagging light bulb. 2 officers in plain clothes waited. No ranks, no insignia. One gestured to a chair. I sat. They didn't ask what I'd seen. They didn't even look curious. Write your findings, the taller one said, sliding a single sheet toward me. No header, no gate, no prefilled fields. Just white space. I wrote what I always wrote: environmental details, security status, anomalies noted. I left out the bodies, the cylinder, the hum. Not because I wanted to, but because I'd done this long enough to know when the reader already had their version ready. The shorter officer took the page without reading it. He placed it in a manila folder thick with other reports. Then he pulled out a typed sheet, single-spaced, and slid it back to me. This is your statement, he said. 3 sentences. 1 line about the inspection being completed. 1 about no structural hazards found. 1 about no personnel present during the visit. No signature block, no date. Just a stamp in red ink. Filed. I looked at him. He looked back like a man staring through glass. Keep your copy, he added. The taller one closed the folder and stood. You'll be reassigned, he said, as if we'd been talking about the weather. When they left, the room felt heavier. I folded the typed sheet into quarters and slipped it inside my coat. The real notes I'd taken, folded schematics, the Polaroid. The frequency list stayed in the inner pocket, under the lining. An hour later, my reassignment came through. Border checkpoint duty, 3 weeks. It was the kind of posting that kept you in plain view and out of trouble. Or so they thought. That night, in the rented flat I used between assignments, I pulled out the sheet they'd given me. 3 lines, neat margins, perfect type. I turned it over blank. I held it to the light. Nothing. But when I ran my fingers over the paper, I felt it. An impression. Writing that had been pressed into the sheet from another page above it. Shaded it with the side of a pencil. Words emerged, faint but legible. A time, a date, and 2 words: room sealed. It wasn't my handwriting. I slid the paper back into the folder with the others. I'd learned to keep what I wasn't supposed to have. And that should have been the last of it. But a week later, someone left an unmarked envelope under my door. Inside was a cassette tape. The label just said, Alexanderplatz. I didn't own a cassette player anymore. I had to borrow one from a neighbor, an old East German unit with buttons that stuck. The tape inside was wound tight, no leader visible. I pressed play. At first, only the hum. Lower than I remembered, but steady. It bled into the cheap speaker, making the casing vibrate under my fingers. Then, faintly, the sound of boots on concrete, slow, deliberate. A voice followed. Male, mid-30s, speaking in German, but with an accent I knew too well. He'd learned it the same way I had, through necessity, not heritage. My mind ran through names, faces, but I already knew before the sentence was over. It was Kramer. I'd trained him myself in Saigon, 1971. Last I heard, he was dead. Not missing, not presumed dead. On the tape, his tone was casual, almost friendly. He gave a series of coordinates, then said something that made the hair on my arms rise. Begin cycle 9. The hum on the tape climbed, exactly like it had in the room with the cylinder. There was a pause, and then a muffled sound like someone dropping a bag of sand from a height. I rewound and listened again, counting the seconds. Between his words and the sound, there were exactly 9 beats. The rest of the tape was silence, until the click of the recorder stopping. I sat back in the chair, the tape still in the machine. My flat felt smaller. Every sound outside, a car passing, a door shutting, seemed to echo like it was part of the recording. I considered burning it. Instead, I rewound and listened again. This time, I caught something in the background. I'd missed a metallic rattle, irregular, almost like the catwalk above the void in that underground chamber. I paused the tape and checked the machine. No defect. The sound was real, embedded in the recording. Kramer had been there. After me, and he'd lived long enough to leave this behind. I pulled the cassette out, wrapped it in wax paper, and slipped it into the lining of my coat. If the hum was still in that place, if Kramer was working with it, then the bodies I saw weren't the last. 2 days later, I found a note tucked under my coffee cup at the checkpoint. No signature, no address, just 2 words. Room open. That's when I stopped wondering if this was over. The note stayed in my pocket all day, its edges curling with the heat from my hand. After my shift, I walked 3 blocks to a cafe that smelled of burnt sugar and overboiled coffee. A man was waiting in the corner, suit too clean for the neighborhood. He didn't introduce himself. "You know the room," he said in English, soft enough to be swallowed by the clink of cups. "What you don't know is who paid for it." I didn't answer. He slid a folded sheet across the table, corporate letterhead from Seattle, washed out from multiple photocopies. Below the logo, contract number, and a signature I recognized from arms procurement memos. The Stasi hadn't built the cylinder alone. They had help from a defense contractor we'd been told was strictly domestic. Experimental acoustics, he said, sipping his coffee. No jurisdiction if it's offshore. No treaty violation if it's not declared. I scanned the page. Buried in the fine print was a clause about transient physiological incapacitation and non-lethal field trials. Non-lethal was the word they always used before the bodies started stacking up. He handed me a second-page shipping manifests. Crates from Bremen to Rostock, then overland to Berlin. Some labeled machinery, others maintenance equipment. All routed through shell companies with names bland enough to vanish in any ledger. I asked why he was telling me this. "Because," he said, "I think they're still running it. And your friend on the tape? He's not working for them. He's working with them." I folded the papers and slid them into my coat. "You expect me to believe you just want to help?" He smiled, thin and humorless. "No, I expect you to remember me when it matters." We left separately. Outside, the air had that metallic bite again, faint but unmistakable. Back at my flat, I compared the manifests with my own notes. Dates lined up every time the hum had been reported by anyone. A shipment had arrived in East Berlin within the week. Some of the crate numbers matched the code on the box. I'd found near the cylinder dot, at the bottom of one manifest, was a notation in German. Testgruppe 3, Ausländische Technik, foreign technology. I sat there with the papers spread across my table, the hum almost audible in my head. If the Stasi in a West Coast defense firm were sharing a lab under Alexanderplatz, it wasn't about ideology. It was about proof of concept and leverage. The next morning, a plain envelope was slid under my door. Inside was a single photograph. The freight door I knew too well, half open with a shadow just visible beyond it. Written on the back in block letters, cycle scheduled. 3 days. That was the last time I slept without the recorder running. 2 days before the scheduled cycle, a courier dropped a thick envelope on my desk at the checkpoint. No return address, no markings except my initials in block print. Inside were blueprints, precise, clean, folded with military care. The title block read, Chemische Forschungsanlage, Ost Berlin, Chemical Research Facility. I knew before opening the first sheet that it was a lie. The vents, the wiring diagrams, the service shafts, they were the same routes I'd walked, just stripped of anything that might suggest the machine existed. On page 3, near the freight door's position, the space was labeled material storage. No mention of a cylinder, no central chamber, no catwalk. But in the corner of the blueprint, just above the legend, was a faint mark in pencil. A small X. The handwriting was familiar, cramped, angular. I'd seen it in '72 on Forged Identity. Papers sold to us by a German informant who played both sides. A man who had made a living off selling maps that led nowhere. Unless you knew how to read the lies. The X didn't mark the machine. It marked an access point, a narrow utility. Run above the main chamber, reachable only from an old elevator shaft, decommissioned decades ago. A blind spot. I spread the blueprints across my table and traced the lines with a blunt pencil, overlaying them with my own memory of the walk. The seam in the wall, the ladder into the pipes, the warm air from the hatch. The access point sat right above the cylinder. If the cycle was in 2 days, that space would be the only place to see it in operation without stepping into the room. That night, I copied the critical sections and burned the rest in a tin pan on the balcony. The ashes floated off into the snow like black paper moths. The next morning, I walked the block where the informant used to keep a front of stamp shop with more dust than customers. It was boarded now, but the slot in the door still took envelopes. I slid one in with the copied map, no note. If he was still alive, he'd know I was asking for confirmation. Hours later, I found a response under my door. A single torn scrap from one of the blueprints, the X circled twice in red. Below it, a number I recognized immediately, 9-3. He'd seen the machine too, the day before the cycle. I gathered what I needed: the pocket recorder, extra film for the camera, and a coil of rope. I wasn't going back through the freight door. When? I closed the latch on my case. The hum was already there, faint but clear, bleeding through the walls of my flat. And it wasn't coming from below Alexanderplatz. It was coming from somewhere, much closer. The hum followed me all the way to the old elevator shaft. I'd found the entrance in a service corridor under a tram depot, padlock already cut. The air inside was warm, carrying the faint tang of burnt circuitry. I clipped the rope to a rusted beam and descended. The shaft was narrow, the walls close enough to scrape my shoulders. At 30 feet down, my boots touched the top of the service platform. From here, a narrow crawl space ran toward the chamber. Halfway through, the hum shifted higher now, sharp enough to make the fillings in my teeth ache. I switched on the recorder. The needle jumped immediately, pegged in the red. I knew that I was hearing the weapon itself. A deserter I'd met years before had told me about waveforms you don't walk away from, sound that could stop a heart without leaving a mark. I'd believed him in theory. Now I could feel it, pushing against my chest with each pulse. Through a grate ahead, I had my first view. The chamber lit from below, the cylinder glowing like molten steel. 3 new figures lay on the floor in the same precise arrangement I'd seen before. Masks hung useless around their necks. No blood, no movement. The hum deepened, shifting into that familiar pattern 9, pause 3. As it did, the nearest body twitched. Not much, just a small flex of the fingers. The others followed, in sequence, like an invisible signal traveling through them. I raised the camera and took 2 shots. The flash was muted, hidden by the grate. The pitch climbed again, and that's when I felt it, my pulse stumbling, breath catching like someone had reached inside and pinched it closed. I bit down hard, forcing focus. My vision narrowed to a tunnel around the machine. I pulled back from the grate, heart hammering against the rhythm, until I found a section of the crawl space where the sound dulled. I stayed there, listening. After 12 minutes, the hum dropped to its original low frequency. When I looked again, the bodies were still. I backed out, slow, rope biting into my gloves. The climb to the surface felt longer than the descent. At the top, I crouched in the dark service corridor, breath fogging, and realized my hands were shaking not from fear, but from the aftershocks in my chest. The weapon worked perfectly, and the next time they turned it on, I might not be the one. WATCHING. I left Berlin a month later. Reassigned again, this time to an embassy post that required no fieldwork and no questions. Officially, Alexanderplatz wasn't in my files. Unofficially, it was in my head every night. In the new apartment, the walls were thinner. The city noise bled through trams, radios, the occasional dog barking. But sometimes, usually past midnight, I'd hear it, that low, steady hum. Not loud enough for anyone else to notice, but precise enough to match the pulse I knew by heart. 9, pause, 3. I'd get up, walk to the window, open it wide. The street would be empty. No machinery, no vents, no reason. Just the hum, settling into my chest like an old injury. A few weeks ago, a storm rolled in off the river. The wind rattled the panes, whistling in the frame. I froze halfway to bed. It wasn't the wind, it was the same vibration I'd felt. In that underground chamber. I stood there until it faded. Could have been minutes. Could have been hours. Now, when it happens, I don't look for the source. Because if someone is still running the machine, I'm not sure I want to know how close. It is. I keep the Polaroid in a drawer. I never open unless the room is dark. The colors have faded, but the glow from the cylinder still bleeds through, like it's lit from inside the paper. Some nights, I think about burning it, but then I remember the sound, the way it pressed into my ribs, and I wonder if the picture is the only proof I didn't imagine it. No one asks about Berlin anymore. The archives are sealed, the names erased. Even the buildings above Alexanderplatz have changed. But somewhere, behind a wall, no one checks. The machine is either gone or waiting. And when the hum comes back, no matter where I am, I stand still and listen. Not because I want to, because I know it remembers me. If you stayed with me to the end, you've just heard something most people were never meant to know. Follow if you want to see what else they buried. And in the comments, tell me, do you think they turned it off? Or is it still running somewhere right now?